or whatever.
We'll call this meeting to order. The chair of the board has asked me to chair this committee meeting. In light of the fact that the chair of the committee is not with us today, unfortunately. So we'll take up the following items for approval. Action item 1A is the approval of the minutes of December 5, 2019. I'll move its approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes have been approved. Action item 1B is the policy calendar. Policy item 1A is a resolution requesting that the Board of Trustees authorize a contract with the American Museum of Natural History on behalf of the CUNY School of Professional Studies for the purpose of providing online science courses. Through this existing partnership, 13 graduate-level on-science courses are offered to students at SPS. The term of the contract shall be 5 years, and the estimated value of the contract shall not exceed $2,500,000 based upon projected enrollments. I'll now call on George Ott. Is it Ott? Am I saying it correctly? Otti. George Otti, Senior Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at SPS, to provide further background on this item. Mr. Otti.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Dean Mobilescu. If it's okay, I'd like to be joined by the Associate Dean for Administration and Finance, who knows much more about the fiscal nature of the contract than I do. If you could come up.
Please, thank you.
Okay. This is Washington Hernandez. Some time ago, the American Museum of Natural History approached SPS because it had developed through a grant with Atlantic Philanthropies a series of online courses based on exhibitions at the museum. It had never really identified a constituency for those courses, and it was losing its learning management system, which at the time was e-college. It is the job, basically, the mission of SPS to be responsive to needs and opportunities. This was both. It was an opportunity to work with the American Museum of Natural History in partnership. It was also fortuitously a need just created by the New York State Legislature, which had mandated that anybody finishing an MS in Ed, a Master's of Science in Education, needed a general science course. And this was effectively an addition to the curriculum. It was only 6 weeks long, the course. It was online. So SPS effectively brokered a relationship that was not just for SPS, but for the university. And as a matter of fact, most of the students actually come from the schools that offer masters in science. We don't. Brooklyn was the first and major taker in this. We've offered it for some time. The American Museum of Natural History creates the courses, designs the courses, recommends faculty. We hire them as CUNY adjuncts. Brooklyn, in particular, keeps a portion of the tuition but returns a portion to the American Museum of Natural History via the contract, and we also keep a small piece of that. And that's basically what's been going on for some years now. So we're seeking a renewal of that contract.
And for how long has it been going on?
That antedates both Washington's and my presence. It goes back to the double aughts. I think it's about 2004.
2004.
I became Chief Academic Officer in 2008. So some of this is beyond my ken, but that's my understanding.
Any questions or comments from the committee? Yes, sir.
So it's saying that it won't exceed $2 million, or is this 2.5 million?
Mm-hmm.
And so how much was it between 2004 and now to finance this?
can I turn to you, Washington, for
Right,
that?
so we don't have all the numbers for that. I would have to go back because there is the model of shares and accounting for the enrollments. The contract originally was about 2-3 in the past, but there's still open receivables. Not everybody pays their tuition.
How the financing works, it's a revenue sharing model with the museum. And so the museum keeps 35% of the revenue for the students that participate in the program. So we feel at 2.5 over 5 years, based on the historical pattern, that we likely won't exceed that, but it really depends on how many students participate in the program and what the revenues that are generated. That's essentially what we're paying the museum. We're paying them a share of the tuition revenue.
Henry?
How many courses are currently being offered in a year?
There are 13 available. Typically, there are offered something like half a dozen in a year. They're offered on a rotating basis. The American Museum of Natural History did this as a way of preserving some of its better exhibitions and their educational value after the exhibition had run its course. The one I like to talk about most is the Solar System course, which has Neil deGrasse Tyson as a presence in the course. He's not a especially active presence in the course, but he was behind the design and most of the text. We are just now approving, which will add a 14th course, a marine biology course, to the mix. And we just, on the basis of demand and availability, offer about half a dozen a year.
And how long does each course last?
It runs for 6 weeks. The idea is that the students will focus primarily on that course while they're taking it. It's offered at various times. The biggest uptick in enrollment is typically over the summer.
Thank you.
Is there ongoing curricular design, or are they leveraging their past year's development for the future?
It's a wonderful example, actually, of something people too infrequently think about, which is not just the creation, but the curation of online courses. The solar system course, for instance, was completely redesigned, not just because Pluto was downgraded to a planetoid, but because we had really taken on so much in that particular course and sort of pared that back to something that was much more useful, in particular to teachers. We have created courses that are entirely new since then and take advantage of new technologies. One I'm especially interested in and proud of and a little too prone to play around with is an evolutionary biology course that allows you to experience mutations over time, much more time than you could devote to a course, in populations of lizards in Madagascar. And allows you to simulate that as a sort of a lab function of the course. So these are constantly evolving, they're constantly being upgraded and updated.
Yes, sir.
So do we know like how much revenue is brought in? Like you say 35% goes to the museum, so like, how much would that 35% be?
I think the estimate that we came up with was, I think it's about $400,000 a year. And so we felt that with a 5-year contract, that with $2.5 million, that we were likely not to exceed that. Because the number of students enrolled in these programs and the revenue has been fairly consistent over the last several years. And so we expect it to be, I would say, less than $500,000 per year.
John?
The campus share is an equal 35%, or is it negotiated with the campuses?
Depends on the method of enrollment. When their students are enrolled through AM&H, their share goes to 65%.
I'm sorry, what does AM&H mean?
American Museum of Natural History.
History.
Sorry.
So their share increases.
When they do the enrollments. when students enroll at the museum.
And the students that enroll are CUNY students enrolling through the museum?
Yes, they can be CUNY, they don't have to be CUNY students. We have students enrolling there and also through Brooklyn College and at CUNY SPS.
Brooklyn College manages its registration of its own students.
So I'm confused, and that was, their share was the college's share, or their being AM and H? I asked about the college share,
35.
35.
So who gets the other share? So it's 35% for the museum, 35% for the college, and then what else is there?
SPS. There's a fee that the museum assesses for each course, and the fee is, for each student, it's $549. At the end of the day, it comes out being roughly 60-40. The museum getting about 40%.
So the fee is on top of the 35%, is that what you're saying?
It's included.
It's within the 35%.
So, now I hate to say it, now you've confused me. You have a student who's enrolling from Brooklyn College, example. What portion goes to Brooklyn College?
35%.
35, so then 65% goes to the museum.
Yes.
No, SPS.
I'm sorry, reverse that.
Reverse.
Reverse
That,
that. Yeah, reverse that.
Yeah.
Killing ourselves.
that did not feel right, though.
No, I'm
Make
sorry,
your life
reverse
hard.
that.
Okay, so 65% goes to the school, 35%
35%.
goes to the museum.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's different.
And, what is the fee covering?
The fee is the first share is for the development of the course. They have upfront courses, they have upfront costs for the class, for the system, $250,000 per course.
The average course costs about $250,000 to develop.
Mhm.
But that's a fee borne by, I need to emphasize this, by the American Museum of Natural History.
Mhm.
And really the tuition that goes back to them is ultimately cost coverage.
Any other questions or comments? I should have done this before, but I'll move this approval of policy item 1A, and do I have a second? Any further discussion? If not, all in, yes, sir.
So so you got the revenue coming in, and then there's the fee. And this is all for CUNY students, or is this for other students also, like SUNY?
Our students are CUNY students.
They're all, it's just
All
CUNY.
CUNY students.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Are there any abstentions? One abstention is noted. The policy item is carried. Policy item 2A is a resolution requesting that the Board of Trustees authorize the ability to waive tuition and fees for the pre-selected college credit course enrollments of non-degree students participating in the Math Start ASAP program, the ASAP program, for the spring 2020 semester. Bronx Community College and Kingsborough Community College will continue the pilot program, and Queensborough Community College will be added. The total number of students served for the spring of 2020 will be approximately 175. The estimated waived tuition at the three colleges is $463,750. And I'll now call on Vice Chancellor Donna Linderman to provide further background, and I'll move the approval of item 2A, and do I have a second?
You have a second.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the possibility of expanding this extremely promising program. Math Start and ASAP have bonded together to remove barriers to students who have significant remedial math need, with the opportunity to earn some college credits while they are addressing their deep math needs. We piloted the program this fall at Bronx and Kingsborough. We enrolled 102 students across the two colleges, 47 students at Kingsborough and 55 at Bronx. I'm pleased to say that the program enrolled within 2 weeks of us announcing it at both colleges. That's how keen the interest was in this opportunity. While Kingsborough's program is still underway because of their extended 12-6 fall calendar, I'm pleased to share with you today some of the outcomes at Bronx, which are extremely positive. Typically, Math Start has very high completion rates as well as change in proficiency when students are only addressing their math needs. What we found in this intervention was that we saw almost comparable rates. Almost 85% of students completed the program, and almost 90% of them completely wiped out all of their remedial math need while simultaneously taking several credit courses. Which is quite amazing if you think about these are students who came in the door needing both arithmetic as well as elementary algebra, movement that would typically take 2, if not more, semesters if they were moving through traditional remedial coursework. In terms of the credit courses, we found at Bronx, just speaking about Bronx right now, we found that 2/3 of the students passed their credit courses, which is a comparable pass rate to first-time freshmen in their first semester at the college, and that the majority of the students earned a C or better. So the students did extremely well in the intervention. We would very much like to expand it to a third college so we could see how it works in a variety of settings. We actually have a line of colleges that are interested in joining it, but for the spring semester, we would like to be able to add Queensborough to the mix and to expand the pilot to 175 students. So I'm here today to answer any of your questions and to let you know we're very pleased with the outcomes. Again, I'm just sharing from one college, but we think that it's extremely positive, and we're very pleased to support the students in this way on their academic momentum journey.
Questions or comments from the committee? Yes, sir.
So is, like, how is the cost for the credit, how does that number come about?
So the way it works is the students, the ASAP program covers the instructional costs of the courses as well as any fees that the students may incur. So meaning they have to pay a fee to join the Math Start program. So the tuition costs are waived. ASAP covers the instructional costs, which is the same way we support our College Now non-degree programs. The tuition costs are waived. The colleges can claim those credit course costs on Form A. So the revenue flows at a later date, but it does have to be waived upfront so that the students do not have to pay anything to participate.
And the rate, the per credit rate that's referenced in the resolution is the approved rate that's in the tuition and fee manual. So that $265 per credit rate is the board approved rate for per credit work.
In the pilot, they could take up to 3 pre-selected college courses. Can you explain which courses those were, and as well, how many of the students actually took all 3?
So it was up to 3 courses. So at Bronx Community College, they opted to offer freshman comp and the FYS course, freshman year seminar. So both colleges were hopeful that they would offer up to 3 courses. Bronx selected to offer 2. They worked with the academic departments to select faculty who would work with the students in a cohort manner so that they had full support. At Kingsborough, students took a student development course, a sociology course, and a history course. So they opted to do 3. In the spring, we believe we can offer 3 at all colleges because we have an extended time. Summer is longer than winter, so we're hoping to stagger the opportunity so students can take up to 3 courses. And all students were registered for all of the courses that the colleges offered.
Thank you.
When you say all colleges in your last comment, what did you mean, all colleges?
The colleges that are partnered with the ASAP program and CUNY Start.
Right.
So I'm being a little overzealous. The word on the street is out that this is a very promising model.
Yeah.
So the colleges that have both programs have all indicated that they're very interested in becoming part of it down the road.
So the outcome figures are phenomenal. They're wonderful.
Thank
And just to go to this all-college business, I wonder what consideration, Matt, we have given to scaling this to every eligible student who would benefit by this waiver, what it would cost and how we would go about doing that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and, you know, we were deliberately conservative on this when we came to the fiscal committee back in the fall to approve this for the fall program at Bronx and Kingsborough, because we wanted to see what the outcomes were and if they were successful. We're certainly really encouraged that we're adding a third cohort now at the spring. So yeah, I think that's something as we're developing our budget for next year and looking at items in our request and what our state and city funding patterns are, to see if this is something that we can scale up for next year or not.
We did include it in the request, but as you know, it is a request.
It's a request, right?
Sure, the only thing that, just to echo what Vice Chair Schwartz just indicated, I mean, one of the things that I found, and this goes back a few years now, that found it frustrating, is things that worked, and we documented and showed that they worked. We were a bit slow, and at that point it was ASAP, and we were slow in scaling. We had a nationally recognized program, and we were dragging our feet in attempting to scale. And I would strongly suggest we have something, the numbers sound amazing. When you talk about 90%, that's a stunning number. And yes, you want to see it work in a variety of situations, but if it works in 3 of our schools, we may honestly want to look to try and scale sooner rather than later. Then I would just leave it at that. But we have something that works. We shouldn't let the rest of the world move forward before we do. And that's just looking at past history, not current history.
I hear you.
There are significant changes to designation of MathStart eligible. I believe you need a index 40 or below, and that may completely change the composition of the cohort eligible for MathStart. And in addition, at least at CSI, MathStart students tend to do very poorly unless they're very advised to avoid certain math classes as a subsequent follow-up class. And so the scaling is complicated. It doesn't work, for example, for STEM students, and so there needs to be a parallel advisement model to tailor expectations.
Well put, John.
Yes, sir.
Is there like an English kind of variation to this program, like a counterpart? Because there's a lot of students who also have difficulty reading, or English is not their first language, so is there consideration to go into other majors outside of STEM and math?
So we are piloting a reading, writing start program actually at Queensborough, where we could, and it's in its infancy right now, but we would like to see if we could also use that same space in the summer to see if we could create a condensed model over 8 weeks to help make comparable changes in proficiency in a relatively short period of time, because our curriculum development and teacher training tends to be a little bit slow because we do train a full semester in advance. I could say we're working on it, but your point is well taken. There are students that could certainly benefit in the reading and writing space as well.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
So when it comes to the 463, 750,000, which pot is that coming from? Is that coming from Central, or are the campuses going to be contributing anything to cover that?
The university is supporting that.
I tell you, I've got to say, and I don't profess to be expert beyond what I'm reading here, this seems like a terrific program. And echoing what Chairman Thompson said, this is something we ought to really jumpstart, like quicker than normal, and make an example, because it's already gotten great recognition. We'd be crazy, frankly, not to push it.
Thank you. Well, with approval, we are ready, willing, and able to expand it. I actually had the opportunity to float the idea with the Chancellor when he first came on board, and you were very excited about it. So I'm very pleased to be able to share these positive early outcomes.
So thank you very much.
You've been here 7
Right.
months, you haven't scaled it up yet? Jesus.
I think we're ready for a vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? It carries, the resolution carries unanimously. Yes, sir.
Just a question. So the last, so we're waiving the fees on this one. In the last one, with the museum, there were fees attached to that. So is there any conversation of waiving the fees for other programs? Because the students on that program would benefit also from waiving fees.
There was no discussion about it. It wasn't part of the proposal. It's something that we can ask people to take a look at. Policy item 2B is a resolution requesting that the Board of Trustees authorize a contract with Crown Castle Fiber to provide dark fiber services for a maximum of 10 years at an overall cost not to exceed $15,614,400, which includes a one-time initial build spend of $2,000,001 and a monthly recurring cost of $112,620. This proposed 10-year agreement with Crown Castle Fiber will allow for continuing service as well as improve the overall resilience of the dark fiber networks by providing a second path for the dark fiber to enter into each CUNY location. I'm going to call on Executive Vice Chancellor Hector Batista to provide further background on this item, and I'll move the approval of item 2B. And do I have a second? And before we have any discussion, before we hear from Executive Vice Chancellor Batista, I want to announce that it's his birthday today, and happy birthday, Hector.
And what's dark fiber?
There we go. Thank you, Chair Schwartz. This contract will support our need for available high-capacity network that connects the central office and campuses to each other and the internet. This contract is under the New York State OGS contract, which allows to receive most favorable terms and pricing available to all state entities. The primary contractor with NiceNet, we have already been using Crown Castle, and the college has already expressed satisfaction with services and their customer service. This contract will also not increase the cost about over 10 years, which allows to better forecast our operating expenses. We also provide colleges with a second fiber feed into their campus, which reduces and eliminates the potential for outages. It also allows the consolidate of two separate contracts for similar fiber services into one single contract, reducing costs and improving services. I think I have our CIO, Brian Corn, here if you have any questions, but that's really what this contract is all about. Thank you. How is dark fiber different from any other kind of fiber?
Thank you.
It's
better cooked.
Good evening.
Good.
Brian. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What is dark fiber?
Yeah.
So-
And how is it different from other fibers?
There you go.
So the basic difference between dark fiber and regular fiber is dark fiber is not lit, and when you connect the technology to the fiber and you actually activate it, it becomes a lit fiber. So it's capacity we have with the fiber network, and as we light the strands, they become lit fiber within the actual fiber itself. So we have capacity to grow if we need to, and we have additional strands if any strands do get broken or cut.
Does this replace existing fiber, expand existing fiber, complement existing fiber?
So the Crown Castle fiber network we have already built across the university. So this is existing fiber we have. The second build out that's recommended in the contract would be to provide an additional strand of fiber coming into the campus through a second point of entry, so that if the primary fiber gets broken or cut through either backhoes or construction accidents or fires in manholes, there is a second point of entry, a second network coming into the campus to provide the resiliency that campuses need.
Thank you.
So my question is, why in January of 2020 are we considering this for the first time? Why haven't we looked at this before?
So we have operated in the past, for the past 16 years, with Crown Castle fiber coming through to us through NicerNet. NicerNet is the vendor that was approved I guess 16 years ago when we built out the fiber. And they have been the company that's been delivering it as a pass-through. They provide the Crown Castle fiber. It used to be, what was it? It was Lucent?
Lucent,
Light
then
Tower.
Light Tower, then it was Crown Castle.
Right, so they've just transitioned from different companies. So right now, it would be best for us to move from NYSERNet to Crown Castle because they're a direct relationship with us rather than going through a pass-through, and it does save us some money over the course of years.
So I'm looking for something that precipitates us considering it now. Is it just this nicer situation? Is that what it is?
So NYSERNet's contract is
NYSERNet.
currently terminated. It's
Got it.
expiring.
Got it.
We're in the process of
Okay.
going through a renewal with them because there's other services we get through NYSERNet
Yeah.
that will continue, but the fiber itself will be a carve-out that will not be a part of the new contract with
Okay,
NYSERNet.
great, thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
So do we know about the credibility for Crown Castle as an organization? Like what's their track record?
So Crown Castle is a very well-established provider of fiber in the city of New York, and they're a very, very reputable company. We have experienced what we will consider to be 4 nines of reliability in the network capabilities, and there is an extremely large satisfaction amongst the campuses and the CIOs of not only the service, but also the customer service that we get when there is a break in the fiber that's beyond sort of the Crown Castle's scope of responsibility. As a matter of fact, just this past weekend, there was a cut in the fiber between 111 8th Avenue and LaGuardia, and Crown Castle was immediately on site resolving the problem. So there's been really good response from them.
Do they have who else do they work with? Like since they're an international organization.
Do you have the list of their other?
It's a very complex set of affiliations, and because it is bordering on a natural monopoly, it's who owns the fiber and the fiber right-of-ways in physical locations. They work with every provider in the city, but they own the particular fiber strands that we own, and one reason that they are a vendor of choice is that they own fiber that serves all of CUNY instead of us having to deal with multiple companies and multiple different cross communications things. But they are a large and increasingly large. When they were Light Tower, they weren't as large. Crown Castle, was a larger provider that bought them and consolidated their holdings, and now they're regional from Maine through South Carolina, I believe, with thousands of miles of fiber optic cables that are available.
And the other thing I would add to that is what we're asking the committee to consider is for us to authorize an existing contract with the state of New York that we can utilize. So the state of New York has a contract with Crown Castle. All of the New York State agencies have access to that. And so the state of New York and its agencies also utilize Crown Castle. So that they're a very large company, reputable company, as Vice Chancellor Cohen said.
There are no other questions. John, you have a question? Yes, sir.
So the campuses that are currently served will have redundancy, but no change in service? Is that my understanding?
Yeah, the goal of this right now the campuses have 20 gigabits per second, so no one is near their capacity. We monitor it very carefully. The major add to this will be a secondary path. So things like happened not too long ago at Newman College, where they had a fire in the manhole where the service and we had the campus would go dark until they get it repaired. Those things will be able to add resilience for the campus. We monitor the traffic patterns, but because we light the fiber, the traffic itself is up to us, so we monitor it carefully. Since we deployed CUNYnet 16 years ago, we have increased the capacity to the campuses by a factor of 200,000%. Went from 10 megabits per second per campus to now 20 gigabits per second campus, increasing internet bandwidth, and we monitor carefully because the internet bandwidth requirements of the university continue to increase at an accelerating rate. So we have to date been able to be able to keep ahead of them and make sure that the campuses have the capacity that the students need.
Anything else in the committee? Yes, sir.
This is also a CUNY Central covering this, or are there any campuses contributing to the cost?
This is a shared course,
Shared costs.
so the cost associated with it is basically divided across the campuses that are on the fiber network. And that's the way the cost has been shared for the last 16 years. So there's no change to the campuses from a cost perspective, other than the fact that they'll see a small reduction based upon the contract, and they'll be able to budget for at least for the next 10 years. They'll know that there'll be a lock-in cost here, so that they don't have to plan for escalation costs as far as the current services are concerned.
So we're ready for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Are there any abstentions? The resolution carries unanimously. With no more
Thank you.
items, thank you. On the policy calendar, I now call on Senior Vice Chancellor Sapienza to address the information items on the agenda. You all should have the university budget, and we'll turn the meeting over to you now, Matt.
Thanks so much, Vice Chair Schwartz, and good afternoon again, everyone. The first item that we're going to address is a report on the food services procurement. And just to give a little background, most of our colleges have dining facilities that are operated by third-party vendors. And so the colleges, through their auxiliary enterprises, have gone out over the years, conducted their own solicitations, negotiated their own pricing and service levels. And so every college through the auxiliary enterprise has had agreements with third-party vendors to provide cafeteria and other dining services to their students and staff. And so some of the challenges that we've had over the years with having that model is that we've had varied levels of services and quality. It wasn't taking advantage of savings and efficiencies throughout the whole system, since each college was doing it on its own. We had concerns with the working conditions of the employees of these third-party vendors that were working on our campuses. And so we wanted to try to address these operational challenges and ensure that food services were provided consistently throughout the university. So in August 2018, we issued 2 requests for proposals. One for a single provider to provide all food service operations to all of our campuses. And the second RFP was for a cohort of providers that colleges can choose from. College of Staten Island was not included in here since they operate their own cafeteria. It's not a third party. But all the other the colleges were included with the objective to find a vendor or vendors who could provide a range of nutritious meals affordable for our students and our staff. And so we put together an evaluation committee that was made up of 10 college executives, plus we had a faculty member from the Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy as a subject matter expert. And we had 2 students represented on the evaluation committee too, one from Hunter, one from Baruch. The evaluation committee evaluated all the proposals, and some of this included on-site visits from some of the vendors. It included a food tasting component, looking at the proposed pricing structure. And the evaluation committee came back, and their recommendation was to go with the single provider. And after a discussion here at the central office, in talking to reviewing the recommendations of the evaluation committee, a decision was made to move forward with negotiations with this single provider that was selected. And the name of this firm is Culinart. Culinart is a very big national firm that does food service operations throughout the country. They have many, many higher ed clients. And so we have begun negotiations with Culinart to enter into a contract. And the goal is that once those negotiations concluded, that we would bring a resolution back to this committee for authorization of that contract. So let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we're really excited about in terms of improvements to our current food services operations at our campuses that we're hopeful this contract will bring. One is capital improvements. That in terms of the food offerings that will be made is one thing, but the facility, most of the facilities on our campuses are going to have upgrades to the capital component of the cafeterias. Some of our facilities that are newer may not, like John Jay College, they just upgraded their cafeteria, but the majority of our cafeterias will have capital upgrades. Two, and this is something our chancellor's talked a lot about over the last 7 or 8 months, is food insecurity. And we think this contract is going to bring about a very positive outcome in terms of low-cost meals, in terms of working with our network of food pantries that already exist in our campuses, and other direct investments into food insecurity. Third is labor harmony. We want the employees of our contract, and we're confident that the employees of, if we do enter into a contract with this new vendor, that they'll make a fair and living wage, and they will have the right to unionize and collectively bargain. Fourth is sustainability efforts. We've already banned styrofoam at our dining facilities, but we want to partner with our contractor to build sustainable and eco-friendly operations at our cafeterias that could address single-use plastics, composting, and other environmentally friendly actions. And the last component that, again, we're very excited about this potential agreement is supplier diversity. We want to ensure that New York State certified MWB and SDVOB firms have a defined access point to the CUNY food service market. And that was part of the RFP that we issued, was that MWBE component was important for us as part of this new agreement. So we are in negotiations. Our Office of General Counsel is taking the lead on that. And again, we're hopeful that we'll be able to conclude negotiations shortly and bring a request to this committee to authorize a contract with this vendor. So happy to take any questions or answer any concerns that the committee might have about that.
So it's contemplated that the Culinart agreement will be buying between Culinart on the one hand and CUNY on the other,
Correct.
not the individual schools?
That's correct, yes. Oh, sorry. The agreement will be with Culinart and the university, yes.
What's the timetable?
We're hoping that we could bring it to the next fiscal meeting, which is March 9th, but again, we're in negotiations, so all depends on how that goes. But that's, we'd like to bring it to, the meeting of the committee as soon as possible. The next one is March 9th.
Yes, sir.
So it's, so for the negotiation, are there any students involved in the negotiation?
No, our Office of General Counsel is negotiating the contract. The students were involved in the evaluation committee, and I have to say the 2 student reps we had on the evaluation committee were outstanding and were very much engaged and asked great questions and gave the folks on the evaluation committee a lot of terrific suggestions. So the students were involved in the evaluation committee, but the negotiations are handled with our Office of General Counsel and our procurement office.
When the contract is negotiated, it'll be brought back to this committee where there is student participation to ask questions about it and to vote yes or no about it.
But will there be time for amendments, like for students to give a contribution after negotiation, and then a possibility to like if the students say that, well, this is what we want to also consider, then can the general counsel take it back and then also consider it then? So there's some buffer time in between the contract coming in and then the decision being made, mm-hmm. So students get some type of input like once the contract is made, outside of just us in this committee.
My understanding is that this committee considers and votes. If we don't like the provisions, we can vote it down and make recommendations. If we do like it, we then pass it on to the full board.
And that is the process.
That's correct. And in terms of, in addition to having the 2 students on the committee, before we issued this request for proposals, we did meet with the entire University Student Senate plenary, and that was also a terrific discussion, and we received some excellent feedback, which we incorporated into the RFP. So there has been student participation in this entire process, from before we even issued the RFP through the entire evaluation.
Tim?
I apologize. I know I'm just coming from another committee meeting, but I'm not sure if this was already touched on, but in terms of the engagement of this potential vendor with the students locally, I think Kason brings up a good point in terms of what amendments we want to make. I think we've seen on some campuses, places like MBJ South have gone out and got food vouchers for their students. And again, I'm not sure if this was already discussed, but I mean, I think that one of the things that we would want to definitely see is this new vendor take a very community student-centered approach to our relationship. And I think that, I know that you're going to be stopping by our plenary in the next couple weeks. Hopefully after the smoke clears, we'll be able to kind of have that person come back, whoever that vendor is, and have them on record giving some verbal commitments to what they plan to do for the students in the upcoming years. Because this is a very big decision. Whenever you centralize anything, it's a really big decision, and I think that that's something that should definitely be considered into how or how much they're going to be involved with our students in the future.
But Tim, as I understand it, that decision to centralize or not had a great deal of student input.
It did. No, I completely understand. I know the two students that were there before,
Right, okay.
but I'm just more so thinking about in terms of when we hammer out the kinks of the
Yeah.
contract itself.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just add that one of the things, as someone who was not initially very enthusiastic about the idea is precisely that idea of talking to the vendor about the importance of the engagement with the local campuses, right? In terms of both the students, but also with the administration for events and things like that. So that's something that was very much emphasized.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this informational item? We're not voting on anything tonight. Yes, sir.
So it's going on the point for the individual campuses. So what do we, is there a cultural variety going to if I go to one campus, is it possible for it to kind of be catered for that community, and then go to another campus and then it's catered for that
That was a
community?
very, very big component of what was included in the RFP and in the discussions with the vendor. Was that excellent point you made, Kason, which is that each individual campus has different needs and student body that has different wants and desires about food service and the type of food that is served. So yes, that was a very, very large component of the RFP that we issued and the response that we got back from the vendor.
So at City College, we did the contract for the vendor, and the contract was terrible, bad deal, and they lost a lot of money. So say now this is a CUNY-wide contract. Say if it's a bad deal, now everybody is going to be in a bad situation. So what consideration is being made? So a situation that took place at City College, is it going to take place for the entire CUNY system?
Well, we're confident. So this vendor is a big national vendor that has a really good track record in terms of providing food service to other higher ed institutions, large higher ed institutions throughout the country. That they'll be that this level of service will be much improved over the service that we've had historically. There will be one of the things that was part of the RFP and that we're talking about is a revenue sharing agreement that the colleges will share in the revenues. But again, of course, part of the negotiations is putting protections in case things don't go well. But we're optimistic that things are going to be much improved on our campuses in terms of the food services.
So we are keeping another committee from meeting in this room, but we have another item on the agenda, which is the review of the budget mid-year. Mr. Sapienza, will you take us
Thank you, Vice Chair.
through
Yes,
the report?
absolutely. So the report is at your seats, the mid-year financial report for fiscal
I
20.
misspoke when I said budgets, the financial report.
Yes, no, thank you. This report is put together by University Budget Office. Budget Director Kathy Abada is here, and I want to thank Kathy and her team for putting this together. For some of you who have been on the committee for a while, you'll notice that the format has changed, and some of the reports, some of the individual reports within the larger report have changed. We've tried to bring about greater clarity and greater transparency. And again, we're always open to feedback on how this report can be helpful to you all as a committee and to our colleges in general. There is an executive summary, which I'm going to touch upon a lot of these items, but I want to go through just some of the pages in the report to highlight where we stand in terms of the mid-year of fiscal year 20. So I'm going to start on page 1. And again, we've tried to incorporate some visual bar charts to make things a little bit more understandable in terms of what our resources are and what our expenditures are. But page 1 is a summary of total resources by campus and by the university administrative areas down at the bottom. A total $3.7 billion budget, what we're projecting to spend this year, and what the projected year-end balances are for each of the individual campuses.
Does resources mean revenue?
Yes, it means both state and city support plus revenue that's generated from tuition.
Thank you.
It also includes the reserves from prior years.
And it includes the reserves, correct. And there's actually a page here in the report that shows all of those, which is on page 9. Shows the sum of all of the total resources, whether it's state, city appropriation, tuition, revenue, and reserves. So page 2 shows the prior year actuals for the year-end balance versus the MY, the mid-year projection. And so here you can see how we're projecting they're going to end this year in terms of the year-end balance versus where they landed last year. And so last year we ended with reserves totaling about $72 million. This year about $54 million, so about $18 million of reserves are projected to be used this year. And you can see all the way over to the right-hand side, the 2020 labor reserve. The senior colleges, as I think most of you are aware, had to set aside funds in a labor reserve in order to cover the collective bargaining agreements and the costs of those agreements for fiscal 20, and that totaled $79 million. There are a few colleges that we were concerned about. When you look at the mid-year projection column, the MY projection column, that are getting very close to using up all of their reserves. And so there were 4 colleges that we were mainly concerned about: John Jay College, Medgar Evers College, College Staten Island, and York College. And we saw on the executive summary page that we are working very closely with all 4 of these colleges. We have provided to them one-time loans to help them get their finances in a stable place and to help them plan for future years. They will have a term of 3 or 4 years in order to pay that loan back. And one of the conditions of receiving the loan is that they are implementing hiring freezes at their campuses. And we'll talk about staffing levels in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of that.
Does this mean, for example, for Medgar Evers, they were in a negative reserve
Yes.
position and they're going to turn positive?
Right,
The
that-
projection is that they're going to
Correct.
turn positive this year?
Last year, Medgar ended with a deficit of $2,779,000. This year, with the work that they're doing internally and the collaboration with us and with the support from us through the loan, we project that they'll have a small surplus of $60,000.
And where does the loan amount appear in the report?
The loan amounts aren't
It's included,
tied
it's
out.
included in the total resources.
It's part of the
right.
total budget, yeah.
So it's sort of hidden, is
Yeah, the loan amounts were $1 million for John Jay, $2 million for Medgar, $2 million for York, and $1 million for College Staten Island. It's a total of $6 million.
So
And,
if we stay with Medgar,
Yeah.
you say the loan is $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you're projecting that they're gonna have a reserve of $2,800,000.
No, I'm sorry, I have 60,000 in the other column.
Oh,
to the
60,000,
left.
mid-year,
Yes.
okay.
Mhm.
And that's after the loan of $2 million?
Correct. Correct.
it also after a forgiveness of 2.7 million that I believe they came in?
Correct. They didn't, the deficit last year of 2.7 was covered. Correct. Same for York College, their deficit was covered.
So I assume we were doing this, but You're having discussions and thinking about how we avoid this again next year?
Yes, absolutely. And the hiring freeze is a big part of that. We're also working with each campus individually. Medgar Evers, which we'll see in just a few minutes when we get to the enrollment page, they had a very large enrollment decline this year, and so we want to work with our colleagues in enrollment management and with the college itself to try to reverse that trend. So each college will have its own individual plan, which we will come back later in the year to this committee and talk about what the plan is for next year to get them back into a stable fiscal situation. Some of those plans will be consistent across the 4 colleges, and some will be unique to each of the colleges.
And how is the labor reserve number calculated per college? How do you do that?
The labor reserve was based on what the projected costs for collective bargaining for both retroactive costs and current year costs were in the current year.
So that's based on the size of their faculty?
Size of their staff, yeah, and the average salaries, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
It was about the labor reserve. Is that exactly the amount that the salaries are gonna be going up, or is there gonna be a hope that some of the campuses recover funds from their labor reserve?
The labor reserve amounts were estimated back in the spring when we allocated the budget, so they were estimates at the time. We didn't have a agreement with the faculty union at the time, so they were estimates. There could be, overages or underages by campus, but they were estimates. But in looking at the numbers, we feel pretty confident that that the reserves will be sufficient for the current year. But again, there's additional costs in the out years that we have to consider as well going forward. Yes.
Sorry, in terms of the labor reserves and what that looks like with the new contract in the future,
Yeah.
are we projecting to continue these labor reserves to continue, being taken out, let's say past this next year? Because I realize that, a lot of the conversation, that I hear from a lot of students is that the tuition hikes are basically funding them in a sense, because the only stream of revenue that's increasing is that. And I think that the only thing that's being taken out of the operational budget that we're seeing besides the deficits and the tap gap is the labor reserves. And has there been any talk about, conversations with the state and the city in terms of, chipping in a little bit more? Because you're seeing at a lot of the numbers that I was looking at, I think on page 8 or page 6, you're seeing schools like Baruch that tuition revenue is almost double, the state appropriations and the city appropriations for the year. Mm-hmm. So are these documents also being presented in the budget hearings for the future, letting them know that, in some cases and in some people's districts, that the students are fronting a lot of the burden of the cost of the university?
Well, the budget request for fiscal '21 that was recently passed by the board included additional costs for next year for collective bargaining, because as you point out, there are going to be additional costs next year because there's another increase as part of those multi-year agreements. So that's part of our request, and we are reporting it in all of the request documents that we have, both for next year and in the 4-year plan that's in the request. So that's in there. And in terms of coverage for next year, it depends on the budget situations and how they turn out for us in terms of the state enacted budget and the city adopted budget. So we'll have to see how those play out, but it is part of our request.
Just wanted to make sure on the record that I know and the students know that CUNY is going to be advocating for these things in the future as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Educate you.
Sure.
Since we have the labor contracts in place, we know what the costs are going to be going forward. Mm-hmm. Why do we have a separate line for labor reserve? Why isn't it just part of the personnel services budget?
Going forward, it will be, but this for fiscal 19 and for fiscal 20, we didn't know what the contracts were because we didn't have the faculty union contract. So we had a mandate that the colleges set aside funds so that when the contracts are paid out, there's resources there to cover it.
Thank you.
All right, on page 5, and again, we're not going to go through every page here. We're just going to go over some selected key elements. But this is personal services, expenditure trends. So this is basically salaries And you can see the prior year versus the mid-year projection, and you can see that our personal services expenditures are up 6%. That is all due to collective bargaining increases, which include both the current year increases and the retroactive increases that are gonna hit in the current year, so that's 6%. The next page, page 6, is OTPS increases, so this is our purchasing budget. And you can see there by colleges, there's some up and there's some down. Overall, we're projecting a 6% increase. It's probably a little conservatively high at this point, but again, we are looking at an increase in OTPS. And then on page 10, tuition revenue. This shows where each college is against the tuition revenue target, what their year-to-date collections are. Some colleges, again, are up over their target, some are down. A lot of our community colleges are down due to enrollment decreases, which we'll look at in just a minute. But this, again, gives you a snapshot of where colleges are against their revenues. On page...
Can we just return for 1 minute to page 9?
Sure, of course.
So in page 9, you show us the total state and city appropriation.
Yep.
And tuition revenue, then you show it by school.
Yes.
How are these allocations determined? So start with Baruch. On the one hand, state and city is 35%, tuition 65%. And then look at Medgar Evers, state and city is 66%, and tuition is 34%. How are those distinctions with great difference? How are they made, and when are they made?
Well, this year, for fiscal 20, we reallocated the revenue targets, and we did them based on the historical enrollment patterns of recent history.
Tuition revenue.
So the tuition revenue targets were reset. But the dynamic about a Baruch and a Medgar, and whether those numbers are the numbers that people feel they should, is up for debate. But when you think about a college like Baruch that has a large portion of their students being master's students, where Medgar Evers does not have any master's programs, and the other dynamic about our non-resident students, which pay a higher tuition rate. For most of our colleges, on average, it's anywhere between 7% and 9%. Baruch is about 15%, and Medgar Evers is much lower than the average in terms of non-resident students. So the fact that Baruch has a large proportion of graduate students who pay a higher tuition, large portion of non-resident students that pay a larger tuition, that's why tuition makes up more of their budget than it would for a school like Medgar Evers. Again, whether 65 for Baruch and 34 for Medgar is an appropriate number, I think folks at those two colleges can argue. But that is a major factor as to why colleges have a certain percentage of their budget covered by tuition or not.
And if those folks at those colleges were prepared to argue, with whom do they have the argument?
It would be here with me, myself in my office, yes.
Thank you.
All right, on page 11.
Can I make a point about page 10 first?
Sure.
You mentioned the community college enrollment pattern, that extends to the comprehensive campuses, and I don't want that to get lost. There's a transition from, the total enrollment's more or less steady, but there's a transition from the community college, comprehensive college, into the sort of exclusive four-year senior colleges that's going on at CUNY.
Correct. Okay, page 11 is, again, looking at tuition revenue, how much we collected last year versus what we're projecting to collect this year. We're up 2%. The graduate and professional schools look really strong at 14%. Senior colleges up 4%, that's really good. Community colleges are down 4%, and again, that's directly tied to the enrollment losses at the community colleges. And again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. I want to jump to page 16 because I want to point out staffing trends. And again, because our colleges are feeling some fiscal stress, the numbers in terms of this full-time staff have come down over the last 2 years. And so this shows the last 3 years. The fall semester is the term that's used for each of the last 3 years, fall 17, 18, 19. And we show the comparison, and you'll see there over on the right-hand side, fall 18 versus fall 19. The senior colleges, the community colleges, pretty much every college is down in terms of where they were last year, where they were this year. So I think, that's something to keep in mind. That this is a way that colleges are managing their fiscal situations. Overall, we're down 327 positions versus last year. So I want to make sure that that's something that the committee's aware of. And then on page 18, this is the last page, I just want to touch. Oh, sure, sorry about that, I apologize.
So do we have any idea on what type of staffing are being cut on the campuses?
Yes, if you go to the next page, 17, you can see we do break out here the full-time faculty trend. And so of the 327, 135 were faculty. And I also will point out, beginning on page 30, there are individual college pages which break out by staffing level, the type of staff on each campus. And so you can see the changes from the prior year to the current year for each college, starting on page 30.
Do you see the trend shifting in like a certain area of expertise? Like, is there increasing or decreasing for particular faculty and staff? Like, say, like for like general positions or specialized positions, or are campuses choosing to go more general or more specialized?
I think when you look at what's happening versus last year, this year, I think it's pretty much across the board that all positions are being filled, whether they're administrative, maintenance and operations, faculty. I think colleges are being very careful with filling all of those positions in each of those categories. So I don't think there's any one trend. I think it's across the board.
As a faculty representative, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that faculty at the senior colleges on page 24 went down about 2%, whereas enrollment went down about 1%. And I'd say the faculty are taking the lion's share of the cuts because the lack of searches. Faculty turnover is higher than other areas on campus.
So how does the hiring freeze, like the hiring freeze doesn't give any solution to the faculty problems like on many of the campuses, because you lose somebody, all you can do is replace them with somebody else. So that you can't really get reinforcements from any place else. So how is that?
Yeah, and the hiring freeze that we talked about with those 4 campuses, we know that there'll be some critical positions that they're gonna have to fill, and so that'll be something that we'll keep in mind as we help them, manage the freeze. So it's not a hard freeze in that they can't hire anyone. It just means if they have critical positions before they hire them, we'll have a discussion with them and make sure that we can manage it in terms of their overall finances.
Besides those 4, are other campuses having hiring freezes also?
Some campuses have implemented their own freeze. I know the Graduate Center recently announced something, or so I know there's some colleges that are doing it voluntarily and on their own, and some of those 4 have done it voluntarily also. But every situation is unique. Some have a freeze, some have hiring restrictions. So you can see from the numbers, they're all trying to be very careful in terms of managing their staffing.
If I can ask you to project to the future, our budget proposal recommends hiring over the next 4 years, 500 additional faculty members.
Correct.
In the face of particularly the community colleges, enrollment going down as well as the economy stays good. How do those interplay?
Yeah, I think each college is a unique situation that we have to look at separately, but I think overall, you point out something that's really important, Trustee Berger, which is community college enrollment. We've gone back and looked at this over 30 years. It is pretty directly tied to the New York City and unemployment rate. So when the unemployment rate goes down, enrollment goes down because people, it's much easier for them to get jobs, and the inverse is true. In recessionary times, when the unemployment rate goes up, community college enrollment, spikes very significantly. So that's part of what's going on here. And I think there are some community colleges that we have to look at in terms of resizing their staff because of the enrollment losses. So I think each college is in a unique situation.
And I'll add to that, the other thing you need to think about is also, it could be probably in those colleges that what you're seeing is a reduction on the adjunct. Because the navigating the fluctuating demand in courses, right? Given the size of an adult population, it could be there where you see, and you would assume that you would see the correlation in the staffing, right? But it probably seen better when you look at the adjunct.
And that's a good segue to the last page I wanted to cover in this report, which is page 18, which is the full-time enrollment trend. And again, we have the last 3 fall semesters here, fall 17, fall 18, fall 19. You see overall, at the university level, it's been fairly stable, 205, 206, 204,000. And these are full-time equivalent counts. But fall 17 to 18, fall 18 to fall 19, which is the last 2 columns, senior colleges, we overall were up 266 students, full-time equivalent students, so we were about flat, a little up. Again, there are some colleges that showed a very strong enrollment increase, Baruch, John Jay, Lehman, Medgar, Tech, CSI, again, going back to Professor Verzani's point about the comprehensive colleges showing a decrease. The graduate and professional schools, very, very strong, 7%. The community colleges, again, down 4%, with the exception of government. All of the community colleges showed decreases year to year.
Is there an explanation for New York Tech?
I think it goes back to Professor Verzani's point about Tech is a comprehensive college, so they do have associate degree students.
Okay, got it.
And I think that's a major cause there. So again, we're very happy, as you go through the report, is there any other questions you have and any suggestions you have about how we can make the report more useful, we're always happy to do so. Yes?
So two questions.
Sure.
So on page 24.
Yes.
So you have for the senior colleges, I think I need a little clarification on these numbers.
Sure.
With a change of 2,000% and 18,000%. How do those type of changes take place?
Well, the pending allocations, that $82 million in the mid-year projection column, that's money that will be allocated to the colleges but hasn't yet. So that number is going to go, as we go on throughout the year, that number is going to come way down. But it's funding that we're projecting the colleges will get in their budgets, but they don't have it yet. And so that's why that looks so disparate against last year's number. The tuition revenue above target, we're projecting that we are going to over-collect by $6 million last year. Last year, we were under by $33,000, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that we did reset the tuition revenue targets to make them more realistic. So that's some of the reasons for those, for those wild changes there. But again, happy to go through any questions that anyone might have as they go through this report. Until our next meeting.
Maybe take a little time with the Chancellor on your own. There's a group out there that wants to get in here, we're supposed to be here at 5:30.
Happy to do so.
We're occupying the table and they can't.
One more question. So for the OTPS,
Yeah.
there were some sections that had other OTPS. So why would it be like, so what's the difference for saying other OTPS and saying OTPS?
I'm sorry, Chris.
I don't have the page.
Yeah. That's okay.
On page 7.
Oh, so on what we did here on page 7 is we wanted to show the largest components of what OTPS spending occurs. And so you can see we have the 4 largest components here, which is supplies and materials, travel, contractual services, and equipment. Everything else that wasn't in those 4 categories was in other OTPS.
So with no more items on the agenda, I'll move to adjourn the meeting. I'm sorry, Mr. Berger.
This is the best presentation, I've been on the board for almost 3 years now. This is the best presentation, most comprehensive presentation we've ever had. and it was, for the most part, understandable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berger.
All credit goes to Kathy Amato.
And thank you to our Senior Vice Chancellor and Kathy.
Let's go to back.
So I'll move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.
We're going to quickly turn over, exactly.